a look at any coffee website, packaging, or social media, and you're sure to encounter language like ethical, sustainable, and fair. It sounds great, right? We want to feel that we're conscious consumers and doing right by farmers when we buy coffee. The problem is, the economics of coffee aren't as rosy as the buzzwords imply. Underneath the marketing language, we see that poverty in the coffee lands is an enduring crisis, one that producers have struggled with for generations. There's substantial evidence that demonstrates that systemically low prices are the predominant root cause of poverty and a key barrier to livelihood advancement. And the call to pay higher prices has been reverberating in the background of the $200 to $250 billion coffee industry. Yet, the nominal prices of coffee remain close to the same price they were over 40 years ago. In real terms, it has declined almost 67%. The unsustainably low prices farmers are paid exist alongside volatility due to coffee leaf rust, roya, the omnipresent effects of climate change, mounting investment needs, a growing shortage of migrant workers, and increasing opportunity costs that are forcing droves of farmers to seek other work altogether, often in other countries. Change is the only constant in coffee production, yet prices remain stagnant. Despite an immense amount of resources being funneled into livelihoods at origin and many claims around ethical sourcing, the results that we've seen of economic programs are lackluster. The long-term implications of such a prolonged period of low prices cannot be overstated. Paying a more equitable price for coffee is not just the ethical thing to do, it's key to the future of a thriving, sustainable, and diverse coffee industry. This leaves us with an important question. How can we know we're paying an equitable price for coffee? A little about me. I'm a development practitioner and started my career in development as a Peace Corps volunteer in a small agricultural community in the Dominican Republic. One of my biggest takeaways from working in grassroots development was realizing that economic empowerment is a prerequisite for sustainable development. When I started working at Bellwether, I looked at our coffee buying principles, which emulated the industry's best standards and questioned whether we were doing enough to support coffee producers. We were basing price structures on the best available information, building partnerships with value-aligned specialty coffee importers, and paying competitive prices. But were we really paying an equitable, sustainable price for coffee? Based on my background, I knew that we couldn't explore this alone, and that the best kind of sustainable development is rooted in collaboration. I began to discuss with other industry leaders, from blockchain companies to coffee producers to nonprofits to importers, what equitable pricing should really look like. Is it traceability or knowing where your coffee came from? Is it paying the cost of production or some arbitrary percentage above? Or is it transparency and understanding how money exchanges hands across the supply chain? Traceability is a good first step, but it doesn't tell us anything about farmers' profitability. Understanding the cost of production helps, but still doesn't speak to whether farmers are able to live and thrive on their income. The conclusion that I came to is that transparency is key, but it has to go hand in hand with setting pricing based on farmers' livelihood needs. And that's when I came across the living income community of practice and started to explore what it would really mean to pay a living income-based price. A living income takes into account a nutritious, culturally appropriate diet, decent housing, other basic needs like education, healthcare, transportation, and clothing, and a minimal level of savings needed to withstand shocks and unexpected expenses. Living income benchmarks, or LIBs, are typically calculated based on the Anchor methodology to determine the total cost per capita of a basic but decent standard of living over the course of a year. This cost is then scaled up to arrive at a cost for a typical family size in the area. Living income benchmarks are exceptionally context-specific. The methodology allows for different estimates in rural and urban areas, and the benchmarks are adjusted every few years to account for inflation and changing cost. Work around the concept of a living income has grown from a fairly niche concept to a recognized term. I connected with Heifer International, experts in living income work, and discovered that they were developing a sensitivity analysis to set living income-based pricing. To truly explore the potential of this pricing methodology and put it into practice, we needed producers and a cooperative willing to gather the primary cost of production data, and an importer and an on-the-ground organization willing to facilitate and transparently share the data. Looking at raw primary data from a group of farmers living in the same community and members of the same association provides visibility into the key factors, land size, yields, and expenses associated with cultivation that can either hinder or enable farmers to reach a living income from coffee. Sustainable Harvest, a mission-driven importer whose work is focused on increasing value across the supply chain, readily got on board. A Colombian cooperative, Ashoka, whom we had visited in January of 2020 and purchased coffee from in the past, was willing to collect primary cost of production data with a tool developed by CLAC, the network that represents all organizations certified as fair trade in Latin America. We finally had a coalition. We co-designed Verified Living Income, or VLI, a new method of determining how much to pay for green coffee based on farmers' livelihood needs. VLI identifies a minimum price for green coffee, farm gate, or FOB equivalent, required to close the living income gap by looking at the cost of production, land size, and productivity, which is overlaid with a living income benchmark. In the VLI pilot, 38 smallholder farmers in the Ashoka cooperative based in Tolima, Colombia, worked with CLAC to track data on the cost of production over the course of a year, which included 2 harvests. The cooperative assembled the data and provided additional cooperative level information, including administrative, processing, and exporting cost. Finally, the cost of production data was analyzed by Bellwether and Sustainable Harvest, and a living income benchmark for rural Colombia was overlaid on top. The analysis yielded that $1.89 was the minimum farm gate price required to ensure that the Ashoka farmers would make a living income. One of the most eye-opening moments of this pilot for me was talking to the cooperative manager at Ashoka to review the data findings with him, and him saying, and I'm paraphrasing, that he knew that this was the amount that producers needed to be paid, but he didn't think that the market would bear it. And that now that he had the data to back it up, he could use this price to negotiate future contracts. For me, this is a real-life example of really shifting the power dynamic between producers, who are traditionally price takers, and buyers, who are traditionally price setters. The price that we discovered in the pilot was 20% more than what we at Bellwether had paid previously, meaning that we needed to increase our prices for our 2021 contract. So we shared the data with Ashoka, and we did just that. We quantified our commitment and put pen to paper, setting a new verified living income price for our coffee. Bellwether is now committed to applying living income-based pricing across our coffee menu, starting with Latin America. So where do we go from here? This pilot was just the first step in further developing the VLI approach. Replicating this model in different geographies does not come without its challenges. One of the most complicated metrics in cost of production is, of course, labor. Paid labor is fairly straightforward to track, but there is not a consistent opinion on if and how to account for unpaid family labor. In fact, family labor is often not valued at all. In this pilot, farmers tracked the total number of days each family member spent devoted to either the harvest or the maintenance of coffee, and we multiplied that by the labor rates paid to contracted workers. Moving forward, we want to explore other ways of valuing labor, including applying a living wage to all labor. This will require tracking labor in hours versus days or kilos of coffee collected. Another challenge is that living income benchmarks don't exist in every geography and need to be updated every few years to remain accurate. We need a more well-resourced way to get living income benchmarks and to not only open source this pre-competitive data, but to collect it in a way that is validated and standardized across coffee origins. The final challenge is that this methodology is complicated and time-consuming work. It took us over a year to collect and analyze data on the cost of production from Ashoka and sign a contract based on living income prices. Looking ahead, we need to make this process more turnkey and replicable. We want to explore what it would look like to speed up the data collection process and lessen the burden on producers. We'll need to work with producers on preferred and potentially digital methods of data collection. We need support of organizations who are working at the ground level to facilitate the data collection. And lastly, we want to continue collaborating with actors across the supply chain to truly scale living income-based pricing. As more people in the industry adopt verified living income pricing, hopefully there will be an opportunity to share data across cooperatives and geographies, with consent, of course. So what can the industry do to support verified living income? The good news is there's a lot of work currently happening in the industry. Heifer has 34 established living income benchmarks around the world. Fair Trade recently launched a Mesa Technica, or a technical roundtable in Colombia. And that's just to name a couple. But to really scale this work to ensure that coffee farmers around the world are paid living income-based prices will require full commitment and collaboration of actors across the supply chain, from producer to buyer. Producers, begin tracking all data around cost of production. Cooperatives, determine and leverage verified living income in your price negotiations. Importers, provide full transparency in contracts. Educate roasters on how FOB prices relate to farm gate and how these compare to living income needs. Nonprofits, be bold in advocacy work, directly addressing economic sustainability as key to development. Build initiatives to expand and develop living income benchmarks. And roasters, back up arbitrary terms such as fair, sustainable, and ethical with data. Make living income a core objective in sustainability commitments with true accountability. We have the purchasing power to pay living income-based prices, and we need to put our money where our mouth is. While this recommendation list is just a starting point, living income-based pricing allows us to envision a future where coffee can lead to a self-sustaining livelihood for farmers. If broadly adopted, living income-based pricing can move the industry from ambitious talks and ambiguous commitments to concerted, clearly defined actions to address the fundamental disparities that threaten the industry's longevity. Committing to paying producers economically ethical prices is foundational to a more sustainable coffee industry. Rather than seeing living income as a far-off end, only achievable through dramatic production improvements and extreme diversification, we can meet farmers where they currently are and focus on using data-driven pricing to close the gap. Ultimately, transforming procurement to center on living income is key in creating the economic stability necessary to ensure that coffee provides a viable livelihood for the generations of coffee farmers to come.